I am sitting on the wooden porch of my quiet Colorado cabin, holding a warm cup of tea as the first winter snow begins to fall. The absolute, pristine silence of the mountains is incredibly healing. It is a stark contrast to the toxic, humiliating noise I was forced to endure just 3 years ago. It is honestly terrifying how quickly entitled family members will label you a worthless burden, completely forgetting whose bank account is actively keeping their fake luxury lifestyle afloat. But I am Clara, and I decided it was time to let their ship sink. 3 years ago, my reality was completely different. I had spent 35 years teaching high school accounting, building a solid pension and a quiet, organized life. When my son, David, and his wife, Rachel, bought a massive, sprawling house in a wealthy Texas suburb, they begged me to move into their renovated basement. They framed it as a beautiful family decision, claiming they wanted to keep me close. But the truth was hidden entirely in the numbers. My monthly retirement income was the invisible engine running their entire household. Without them knowing the full extent of my financial control, I had set up automatic payments from my personal accounts to cover their electricity, the water bills, and their skyrocketing property taxes. I had even walked into a dealership and co-signed the massive loan for Rachel's brand new luxury SUV, simply because her own credit was incredibly poor. I thought my financial support was a quiet act of maternal love. I genuinely thought they appreciated the sacrifice. Then came the annual Thanksgiving dinner. Rachel had invited nearly 50 people. The house was overflowing with her colleagues, their wealthy neighbors, and people she desperately wanted to impress. I spent 3 entire days preparing the meal. I roasted the turkey, baked the pies, and seamlessly managed the expensive caterers they had hired for the appetizers. I stayed completely out of the way, perfectly content being the invisible hands making their perfect evening possible. Around 8 o'clock, the dining room was buzzing with loud conversations and the clinking of expensive crystal glasses. Rachel stood up at the head of the long table. She tapped her wine glass with a silver fork. The room instantly fell silent. She wrapped her arm around David, smiling brightly like a Hollywood actress. She started giving a long, self-serving speech about how successful their year had been and how beautiful their suburban home was. Then, she looked directly across the room at me. For a brief, naive second, I actually thought she was going to acknowledge my hard work. I thought she was going to thank me for the meal, or for helping them build this beautiful life. But she didn't. She looked at her friends and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "We are just so incredibly blessed," she announced loudly into the silent room. "Even if we do have to deal with our very own freeloader living down in the basement." A cruel, awkward ripple of laughter immediately washed over the crowd. Guests turned in their chairs to look at me, their faces full of pity and amusement. I stood there by the kitchen door, my hands gripping a heavy silver serving tray. I felt the blood completely drain from my face. My mind went entirely blank with shock. Rachel did not look sorry. She was beaming, absolutely intoxicated by the attention and the cruel power of her little joke. I slowly shifted my gaze to my son. David was sitting right beside her. He knew exactly whose bank account was keeping the lights on in that room. He knew exactly who was paying for the luxury car parked in the driveway. But he did not say a single word. He did not defend me. He just stared blankly down at his plate, cowardly avoiding my eyes. In that one agonizing moment, the illusion completely evaporated. My decades of teaching accounting kicked in, and I saw the transaction for exactly what it was. They did not see me as a mother. They did not see me as a person. They saw me as a pathetic, aging burden who was lucky they tolerated her presence. I was nothing but a silent ATM machine, existing only to fund their delusions of grandeur. I waited for exactly 3 seconds. I did not want to cause a dramatic scene and ruin the holiday atmosphere. Then, I quietly set the silver tray down on the counter. I turned around, walked down the stairs to my basement, and closed my door. No one followed me. No one came down to apologize. And that was the exact moment my heart turned completely cold. I stopped begging for their respect, and I decided it was time to let the numbers do the talking. I sat down at the small wooden desk in my basement room. I did not shed a single tear. I did not storm upstairs to demand an apology, and I did not want to scream. My heart had simply stopped breaking and started calculating. After 35 years of teaching high school accounting, I have learned one undeniable truth about life. Numbers do not possess feelings, and in this exact moment, neither did I. I reached under my bed and pulled out my sturdy, wheeled suitcase. I moved with complete, cold precision. I packed my clothes, my essential toiletries, and my personal financial documents. I left behind every single gift they had ever given me. Those were just cheap tokens meant to buy my continued financial servitude. In less than 20 minutes, my entire physical presence in that house was neatly zipped into one bag. Then I opened my laptop. The bright glow of the screen illuminated the dark, quiet room. It was time to finally balance the family ledger. For 3 entire years, I had quietly functioned as the invisible, heavily exploited financial backbone of their arrogant lifestyle. I logged into the joint banking portal I shared with David. With a few swift, deliberate keystrokes, I transferred every single cent of my pension and retirement savings back into my secure, private account. I watched the balance on their end instantly drop to near zero. Next, I opened the automated utility management system. Keeping a massive suburban Texas home perfectly air-conditioned during the holidays cost an absolute fortune. I calmly navigated to the billing section. I deleted my primary credit card information from the auto-pay settings for the electricity bill. I did the exact same thing for the local water bill, the high-speed internet, and the premium cable television package Rachel proudly bragged about. But I was not finished. I logged into the automotive loan portal. I drafted a formal, legally binding request to officially revoke my status as a financial guarantor on Rachel's luxury SUV. I attached the necessary banking documentation and clicked submit. The financial life support was officially disconnected. There is a very specific, deeply fascinating psychological phenomenon that occurs within toxic family ecosystems. Experts call it the financial blindness of parasites. When a mother quietly pays the heavy property taxes, covers the massive utility bills, and absorbs the crippling cost of living for years, entitled children never see it as a financial sacrifice. They never appreciate the decades of hard work behind those cleared transactions. Instead, they start to view it as the natural, invisible magic of the house. This profound blindness inevitably leads to the ultimate arrogance. They actually begin to believe that their luxurious lifestyle is a direct result of their own superiority. They convince themselves that the person silently funding their entire existence is nothing but a worthless, pathetic burden. The most devastating punishment for this specific type of person is not a screaming match. It is not a tearful argument, and it is certainly not a long, emotional letter begging for basic human decency. The absolute most terrifying thing you can do to a parasite is simply pull the plug on their magic system. When the credit cards are suddenly declined, when the auto-pay bounces, and when the massive bills start piling up on the expensive kitchen counter, their illusion of power will completely shatter in a matter of hours. I closed my laptop, the quiet click echoing in the basement. The house above me was still incredibly loud. I could hear the muffled sound of Rachel laughing with her wealthy friends, raising expensive glasses of wine, completely oblivious to the massive financial earthquake I had just triggered beneath her feet. I picked up my suitcase, walked out the back door of the basement, and stepped into the cool, crisp Texas night. I walked over to my sensible, fully paid-off sedan parked quietly on the street. I put my bag in the trunk, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I drove away from the sprawling, fake luxury of that suburban house, my phone buzzed inside my purse. I didn't even bother to look at the screen. I simply reached in, powered the device completely off, and drove toward a small, inexpensive motel near the interstate. I had never felt so incredibly free. The very next morning, the carefully constructed illusion of their wealth began its rapid, violent collapse. I was sitting in a cheap, quiet diner near the interstate, eating my breakfast in absolute peace. I turned my phone on for just a few minutes to check my personal bank balances. My voicemail inbox was already completely full. David had called me 14 times before 9 o'clock in the morning. Rachel had called 22 times. I listened to exactly one message. It was David, his voice trembling with a pathetic mix of confusion and rising panic. "Mom, what is going on? The cards are all declining at the grocery store. The electric company just sent a final shut-off warning because the autopay bounced. Call me back right now." I did not call him back. I took a sip of my black coffee, deleted the message, and went for a long walk. 3 days later, the real consequences of my paperwork were finalized. Rachel's luxury SUV was never actually hers. It was a $60,000 piece of machinery held together entirely by my excellent credit score and my steady retirement income. It was the ultimate status symbol she used to assert her dominance over me. But the moment my formal request to withdraw as a guarantor processed through the bank system, the loan immediately defaulted into a critical risk status. Without my financial backing, Rachel's abysmal credit history was completely exposed. The finance department sent an automated demand: pay the entire remaining balance in full within 24 hours, or surrender the vehicle immediately. Of course, they did not have the cash. They were completely broke, living paycheck to paycheck under a mountain of toxic debt. I found out exactly how the repossession happened through a frantic, hysterical voicemail from David later that week. It unfolded on a bright, sunny Tuesday afternoon. It was the exact time of day when all their wealthy, judgmental neighbors were outside walking their expensive dogs or chatting in their driveways. A massive, loud tow truck backed straight into their pristine suburban driveway. The driver didn't even bother to knock on the front door. He simply lowered the hydraulic lift, hooked the heavy metal chains directly underneath the front axle of Rachel's beautiful SUV, and hoisted it up into the air. In the background of David's recorded message, the chaos was absolutely deafening. I could hear Rachel screaming at the top of her lungs. She had run out onto the front lawn, completely losing her mind in front of the exact same people she had proudly bragged to at Thanksgiving. "You cannot take my car. Stop it, put it down." She was shrieking, her perfect suburban image shattering into a million pathetic pieces. The tow truck driver ignored her completely. He simply handed David a clipboard with the repossession paperwork, got back into his cab, and drove away. He dragged her precious, shiny status symbol right down the street for the entire neighborhood to see. The panic in David's voice was pathetic. "Mom, please, you have to fix this. Rachel is packing her suitcases. She is threatening to leave me if we don't get the car back today. Please, I am begging you, just wire the money to the bank." I sat in my motel room and listened to the entire recording with a completely blank expression. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. For years, I had been the silent, reliable safety net catching them every single time they made a reckless financial decision. But a safety net is only useful if the people falling actually respect the threads holding them up. I pressed the delete button. I opened my phone settings and permanently blocked David's number. I blocked Rachel's number as well. I packed my small suitcase, checked out of the motel, and started the long drive toward the mountains of Colorado. That tow truck was not just taking away a piece of metal. It was towing away the very last chain they had on my life. I was finally taking my power back, and I was going to let them drown in the reality they created. 2 full years passed in complete silence. I remained safely tucked away in my Colorado cabin, watching the seasons change. I completely ignored the sporadic, desperate emails from my son. But then, a physical letter arrived in my mailbox. It was a legal foreclosure notice, forwarded to my new address by the bank. David had finally hit absolute financial rock bottom. He sent one final, pathetic email begging to see me in person. "Just one last time, Mom," he wrote. I agreed to meet him at a cheap, neutral diner halfway across the state line. When I walked into that diner, I barely recognized my own son. He looked 15 years older. His posture was entirely defeated, and the arrogant, expensive designer clothes were long gone. And more importantly, Rachel was gone. He quietly confessed that she had packed her bags and walked out the very same week the bank started seizing their assets. She had looked him in the eye and told him that a life without status and luxury was simply not what she signed up for. Now he was entirely alone, drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of toxic credit card debt. He looked across the sticky table, his eyes red and swollen. "Mom, I am going to lose the house. I have absolutely nothing left. If you could just withdraw some of your retirement fund to cover the mortgage arrears, I promise I will pay you back. He was begging for a financial bailout. He desperately wanted me to open my wallet and magically restore his broken, fake world. In that exact moment, sitting across from my crying son, a very dangerous emotion washed over me. When a mother sees her child sitting at the absolute bottom, completely broken, her most primal, biological instinct is to rush in and save him. You desperately want to write the check and buy back his peace of mind. But I am an accountant. And in the realm of emotional education, using money to cover up the consequences of someone's arrogance is called toxic pity. Toxic pity is a deeply destructive act. It is the exact opposite of real love. If I bailed him out now, I would completely rob him of his final opportunity to become an actual, responsible man. Standing by and watching him lose that massive, fake house is an incredibly cruel mental surgery. But it is absolutely essential for his survival. A truly strong mother does not rescue her son from the rubble of his own greed. She allows the rubble to completely collapse, so he is finally forced to learn how to build a real foundation from scratch. I looked at David with complete, unwavering calm. I am not giving you a single dollar, David, I said. I will not finance your past mistakes, and I will not pay to maintain a lifestyle that you never actually earned. He stared at me, his face pale and completely stunned. But Mom, they will kick me out. I will have nowhere to go. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. Then you will rent a small, affordable apartment, I replied evenly. You will let the bank take that ridiculous house. You will let go of the lies. You will file for bankruptcy, you will get a second job working with your hands, and you will finally take responsibility for your own life. I will never give you money to save your fake past. But I will support your future as an independent man. He began to sob right there in the diner booth. But it was not an angry tantrum. It was the painful, humiliating realization that the easy ride was permanently over. The old Clara, the silent ATM machine, was completely dead. I did not reach out across the table to hold his hand. I simply paid for his coffee, stood up, and looked down at him. When you are ready to be an adult, you know where to find me. Then I walked out the door, leaving him to finally face his own reality. David eventually lost that massive, beautiful house. The bank swooped in and took every single piece of that fake luxury lifestyle. He was forced to file for total bankruptcy, completely wiping his financial slate clean in the eyes of the law. He moved into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the very edge of town. To pay off his remaining personal debts, he had to take a job doing hard, manual labor. He started working for a local landscaping company. He spent his days sweating in the hot sun, pushing heavy mowers and digging dirt. For the very first time in his entire adult life, my son actually understood the true, exhausting value of a single dollar. It was incredibly hard work. But it was honest work. He no longer had the expensive suits or the arrogant corporate title. But slowly, that grueling physical labor began to rebuild the honorable man he was actually supposed to be. We speak on the phone about once a month now. Our conversations are very brief, very polite, and we absolutely never discuss the past. We talk about the weather, his new daily routine, and the simple reality of his quiet life. I finally have a relationship with my son that is based on actual truth, rather than financial utility. I am sitting back on the wooden porch of my quiet Colorado cabin today. The winter snow is falling gently through the tall pine trees, covering the ground in a perfect, untouched white sheet. I take a long sip of my warm tea, breathing in the cold, crisp mountain air. My bank accounts are secure, my days are completely my own, and my mind is perfectly clear. My life is incredibly peaceful, deeply organized, and most importantly, it is entirely mine. If you are listening to my story right now and you find yourself trapped in a similar situation, I need you to hear this loud and clear. Love does not mean sacrificing your own dignity. Being a good parent does not mean allowing entitled, ungrateful family members to treat you like an endless ATM machine. The moment you allow someone to trample on your self-worth just to maintain a fake image of family harmony, you are no longer helping them. You are simply funding their absolute worst qualities. You have the absolute right to pull the plug. You have the right to pack your bags, close your checkbook, and walk away in complete silence. Leaving my own son in the ruins of his arrogance was the hardest calculation I have ever made. But it was exactly what we both needed to survive. I am no longer the pathetic, invisible woman they laughed down in the basement. I am Clara. I know my exact worth, I aggressively protect my boundaries, and my peace of mind is an asset I will absolutely never let anyone steal again.